It was September, and the humid air off the coast tasted of salt and impending violence. My name is Chief Petty Officer Aaron Brooks, and I was supposed to be on medical leave. 6 months earlier, a shrapnel wound had torn through my left shoulder, earning me a Purple Heart, a titanium plate, and a mandatory rotation back stateside. I hadn't come home alone. At my feet on the porch of my isolated cabin outside Beaufort sat Ranger, a multi-purpose canine who'd served 3 combat deployments. Coat the color of burnt mahogany, eyes like chipped amber, and a titanium upper canine tooth, a permanent souvenir from a close-quarters breach overseas. He wasn't a pet. He was a highly trained weapon, a tracker, and, most importantly to me, the only thing on Earth that knew how to wake me from my night terrors without getting punched. The news had been warning about Hurricane Mara for a week, but Atlantic storms are fickle. The meteorologists predicted a turn north that would spare us. They were catastrophically wrong. By 8 o'clock on a Tuesday, the barometric pressure dropped so fast I felt it in my teeth. The sky turned a bruised, sickly purple, and the wind began to roar. Not a whistle, but a deep guttural sound, terrifyingly like an incoming artillery shell. I was boarding on my last window when the emergency scanner on my counter crackled to life. It was Deputy Wade Carter, barely audible over the static. "Dispatch, this is Unit 4. I can't get down Heron Point Road. The surge is already at 5 feet and rising. The bridge is gone." A beat of static, then the dispatcher, tight with panic. "Unit 4, we have a 911 relay from the Mercer residence at the end of the point. Sarah Mercer and her 2 young kids are trapped in the attic. Water's breaching their 2nd floor. Coast Guard assets are grounded due to wind shear. Can you make it on foot?" "Negative, dispatch," Wade shouted. "The current's sweeping cars away. It's suicide." I stopped hammering. I knew Heron Point, a low spit of marshland jutting into the bay, fully exposed to the ocean's fury. And I knew Sarah Mercer. She was a pediatric nurse who'd helped me navigate the labyrinth of the VA pharmacy a few months back. Her husband was a long-haul trucker, stranded hundreds of miles away. Sarah and her kids, 7-year-old Eli and 4-year-old Mia, were out there alone in the dark. I looked down at Ranger. He was already standing, ears pinned forward, muscles coiled, reading the shift in my adrenaline. "We're not Coast Guard, buddy," I muttered, tossing the hammer onto the table. "But we're not staying here." Within 3 minutes, I was geared up. No plate carrier, just a Swiftwater rescue harness, a waterproof flashlight, 50 feet of high-tensile paracord, a heavy carabiner. I strapped a buoyant K9 flotation vest on a Ranger, and he stepped into it smoothly, familiar with the ritual of gearing up, even if tonight the enemy was water. The drive to Heron Point was a descent into a nightmare. Trees bent completely sideways, root systems groaning. Sheet metal flew through the air like guillotines. When we reached the barricade where Wade had parked his cruiser, water was already lapping at my floorboards. He shined his light at my truck, drenched and frantic. "Brooks, what the hell are you doing? The road's a river. Sarah Mercer's down that road." I yelled over the wind, hooking Ranger's lead to my belt. "You'll drown. The current pulls straight out into the Atlantic." I knelt and looked Ranger dead in the eyes. In combat, dogs track scent, detect explosives, apprehend combatants. But Malinois are also incredibly strong swimmers, with a drive that defies self-preservation. "Ready to work, Ranger?" He let out a sharp bark that cut through the thunder. I stood. "If we're not back in 2 hours, tell the brass I went out fighting." And without waiting, we plunged off the asphalt into the churning black water. The cold hit like a physical blow, stealing the breath from my lungs. The water was a chaotic soup of mud, pine branches, insulation, and gasoline. Only waist-deep at first, but the current was ferocious, trying to sweep my legs out from under me with every step. Beside me, Ranger paddled fiercely, the vest keeping his head above the chop while his powerful legs did the real work. I unclipped the short lead to give him room. "Find him, Ranger." Such, the Dutch word for search. Tracking scent in a hurricane is theoretically impossible. The wind and rain should obliterate any trace of human odor. But Ranger wasn't relying purely on scent. He was reading the microcurrents, listening for high-frequency sounds of distress my battered eardrums couldn't catch, and operating on a bond between us that bordered on telepathic. We swam for what felt like hours, but my watch said 20 minutes. My repaired shoulder screamed every time I shoved a submerged log aside. Every time I faltered, coughing up brackish water, Ranger was there, nudging my chin, urging me on. Finally, my flashlight caught the pale siding of a house. The Mercer place, but it had been ripped clean off its foundation and wedged against a pair of massive live oaks, water already halfway up the second-floor windows. The whole structure groaned, splintering as the surge battered it against the trees. I swam to the submerged porch, hauled myself up, pulled Ranger out by his harness, and smashed a second-story window with my baton. We climbed through into total devastation, furniture floating in waist-deep water that had already flooded the second floor. "Sarah! Illy!" A faint muffled scream from above. The attic. I waded to the ceiling access panel, pushed it open, and shined my light up. Huddled in the corner, shivering violently, clutching her 2 kids, was Sarah, her eyes wide with a terror I'd only ever seen in war zones. "Aaron, how are you here? We're getting you out." I pulled myself up, reached down, and Ranger leaped, scrambling up the drywall until I grabbed his harness and hauled him in. "The house won't hold against those trees much longer," I said, dropping into the calm command voice I'd used in combat. We go out the attic vent onto the roof. I'm tying us all together. I unspooled the paracord, fashioned bowline knots around Sarah and Eli, had her strap me to her chest with a blanket, and tethered the end to Ranger's harness. Then I kicked the wooden louvers out of the attic vent, and we crawled onto the slick, sloping shingles. The storm was at its peak, rain lashing like buckshot, the floodwaters below a black abyss. The shore was 50 yards away across a channel of violent water. "We swim for the high ground by the road," I shouted. "Ranger leads. Trust the dog." Before Sarah could process it, an agonizing crack echoed beneath us. The roots of one oak gave way. The house lurched, tilting 20 degrees. Sarah slipped, screaming as she slid off the edge into the torrent, and because she was tethered to Eli, the boy was yanked over with her. I lunged, grabbing the rope as Eli went over. The sudden weight of 2 bodies dropping into the current nearly ripped my bad shoulder out of its socket. I slammed into the gutter, scrabbling for purchase, screaming as I held the line with my one good arm. Below, Sarah fought to keep Mia's head up while the current dragged them toward the open bay. I couldn't pull them. The angle was too steep, my strength fading. That's when Ranger moved. He didn't wait for a command. Recognizing the failure of the line, he sprinted down the roof and launched himself into the hurricane wind, hitting the black water and paddling with desperate power towards Sarah. "Ranger, hold!" He reached her just as a surge pushed her under, clamping his titanium jaws onto the blanket wrapped around her and the toddler. With the tether connecting him to my belt, he became a living anchor, fighting the current, buying me the seconds I needed. Gritting my teeth, I wrapped the rope around a plumbing vent pipe and used it as a pulley, and inch by agonizing inch, Ranger pushing from below and me hauling from above, we dragged the 3 of them back to the roof's edge. Sarah grabbed the gutter. I pulled them over, then Ranger scrambled up last, shaking off the water, never breaking eye contact with me. We huddled on the peak of the roof, tethered together in the dark, the house groaning beneath us. We'd survived the extraction, but we were stranded in the middle of an angry ocean that had swallowed the town. I thought the worst was over. I had no idea that surviving the storm was only the beginning. The night stretched into eternity. I made my body a shield against the gale, my good arm around Sarah and the kids. Ranger curled at our feet, radiating what heat he had left. By 2 a.m., the temperature plummeted, and hypothermia stopped being a threat and became a reality. Mia had stopped crying hours ago. Eli was unresponsive, staring blankly, and I knew from brutal experience that apathy is the final stage before the body gives up. "Keep him talking, Sarah. Don't let him sleep." She tried, lips bruised blue, coaxing him to tell her about his favorite truck. Then I felt a sharp movement against my boots. Ranger stood, ears flat, nose pointed toward the black water, a low growl vibrating in his chest. Something was coming. I flicked on my light, and the beam sliced a nightmare out of the rain. A massive, uprooted pine, 80 feet long and weighing tons, barreling down the channel like a battering ram, aimed straight at the house's supports. "Brace!" I roared, pulling the tether taut. The impact sounded like a bomb. The whole house shuddered, throwing us sideways, shingles ripping away. The roof, already compromised, finally failed, splitting right down the middle with a sickening groan. We were sliding. The right side gave way completely, and Sarah, the kids, and I were yanked off the apex and dropped into the freezing surge. The water closed over my head. Chaotic, tumbling darkness. Debris striking my legs. The paracord burning through my palms as the current tried to rip the family away. I fought to the surface, lungs burning, shoulders screaming, and broke through gasping. "Sarah, here," she choked, thrashing a few yards off, keeping Mia elevated, Eli clinging to her back. The tether held, but we were sweeping fast toward the open bay. "We swim for the cypress," I yelled, pointing at a stand of ancient, deep-rooted trees about 50 yards downstream. Past those, there was nothing but the open Atlantic. But I was failing. The toll of the rescue, the freezing water, the agony in my plated shoulder had drained me. My left arm was completely dead, hanging useless at my side. The current was too strong. Then I felt a powerful tug on my belt. Ranger had surfaced beside me, and when I flashed my light on him, my heart dropped. The right side of his face was a dark mix of blood and water. A piece of the shattered roof had struck him, leaving a deep gash above his eye. "Ranger, no, Igaspat. Save yourself, buddy. Break away." It was a command I'd never given, the ultimate release of a working dog to preserve its own life. He ignored it. His amber eyes found mine, and for a split second the storm seemed to fade. He clamped his jaws onto my vest, near the collarbone with a growl that defied the wind, and began to swim. Towing a fully grown, waterlogged seal who was in turn tethered to a mother and 2 kids, that 70-pound dog fought the hurricane current. Every muscle in his body strained. He didn't swim frantically. He swam with measured, rhythmic power, angling our drift toward the cypress trunks. I kicked with what I had left to ease the burden. Slowly, agonizingly, we broke out of the channel's dead center. Almost there, Sarah screamed. With a final desperate surge, Ranger dragged us into the flooded canopy. I slammed into a rough trunk, wrapped my good arm around it, locked my legs, and hauled the tether in, pulling the family into the protective cage of the roots. Ranger let go of my vest and crawled up onto a V-shaped crotch in the branches, exhausted and bleeding. As dawn broke, painting the bruised sky slate gray, the winds finally died. The hurricane was moving north. I leaned my head against the bark, completely spent, and looked up at Ranger. He was lying still, breathing shallow and erratic, the gash on his head severe, his eyes closed. "Hang in there, buddy," I whispered, my voice cracking. "You did it. Just hold on." 2 hours later, the heavy thump of a Coast Guard helicopter echoed over the floodwaters. A rescue basket lowered through the trees, and when the swimmer dropped down, he found a battered seal, a freezing mother and 2 children, and a motionless, bleeding Malinois. "We need a medevac for the dog, now," I demanded, refusing the basket until the swimmer strapped Ranger in first. As the basket lifted him into the sky, a cold dread settled in my stomach. He hadn't moved. The triage center at the naval base was chaos. Cots lining a gymnasium floor, survivors and medics everywhere. Sarah and her kids were whisked to the pediatric ward, severe hypothermia and exhaustion, but alive. I sat in the veterinary surgical wing, staring at the floor, refusing treatment for my shoulder, demanding to stay near the suite where Dr. Benjamin Hale, the base's chief veterinary surgeon, was operating on Ranger. For hours, the silence from the operating room was deafening. I replayed the night over and over. I'd asked too much of him. He'd taken a catastrophic blow to the head, swallowed gallons of toxic water, and exerted force that should have stopped his heart. Finally, the doors pushed open. Dr. Hale stepped out, exhausted, still in blood-stained scrubs, pulling off his cap. I stood, legs shaking. Document. He let out a long breath and offered a tight smile. He's alive, Aaron. He's stable. We stopped the bleeding, cleared his lungs, stabilized his core temperature. I dropped back into the chair and buried my face in my hands. Thank God. The debris hit him so hard. I thought he was gone. Hale pulled up a chair, his expression shifting from relief to bewilderment. Aaron, I need to talk to you about that head injury, because what I found doesn't make medical sense. What do you mean? Is there brain damage? No, he said softly, but the blunt force to his orbital bones was catastrophic. It caused an immediate, severe detachment of both retinas, with massive swelling around the optic nerves. I struggled to process it. Okay, can you fix it? Will his vision come back? He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. Aaron, you're not understanding me. Based on the coagulation of the blood and the tissue damage, that injury happened hours before your final swim. The moment the house collapsed and you went into the water, Ranger's retinas had already detached. The fluorescent lights seemed to hum louder. A cold chill ran down my spine. Wait, are you telling me? Yes, Hale said, his voice thick with awe. When Ranger dove into that current, grabbed your vest, and navigated around submerged debris, wrecked cars, and floating trees, he couldn't see a thing. He was completely, 100% blind. He said frozen. Navigating a hurricane surge is impossible for a human with perfect vision. To do it blind, while towing 300 pounds of human weight, defied every law of physics and biology. Ranger hadn't been swimming by sight. He'd navigated that deadly maze using only the scent of my gear, the micro-vibrations of the current, and a bond between us so profound it bordered on the supernatural. That's not even the strangest part. A new voice. I turned to see Captain Gregory Nolan, the base's chief medical officer, walking up with a tablet. I saw you refuse triage, Chief, so I pulled your VA charts to see what we were dealing with regarding that shoulder. The records from last month state the shrapnel damage to your brachial plexus nerve was permanent. They had you marked for medical discharge next week. 70% loss of motor function, severe muscle atrophy in your left arm. I flexed my left hand instinctively. Yeah, it's been dead 6 months. I couldn't lift a coffee cup. Right? Nolan said, tapping the tablet. So explain to me how you're currently clenching that left fist hard enough to crack your knuckles. I looked down at my left hand. I opened my fingers, closed them into a fist, lifted my arm, rotated my shoulder. There was pain, a deep burning ache, but the numbness was gone. The paralysis that had ended my career had vanished. When I was in the water, I murmured, staring at my moving fingers. When Ranger grabbed me, I thought I was going to die. I stopped fighting, but then I felt him pulling, and I knew if I didn't help him, the current would kill him too. I grabbed a tree root with my left arm. I had to. Nolan shook his head slowly. In extreme survival situations, we've seen hysterical strength, a massive dump of adrenaline and cortisol forcing the brain to bypass damaged neural pathways. It's called spontaneous neuroplasticity. But to fully reactivate a dormant nerve cluster like yours, that's a 1 in a million anomaly. I looked through the glass of the surgical suite at my dog lying on the steel table, wrapped in heated blankets. The blind warrior who'd refused to let me die in the dark. In saving me, Ranger had forced my brain to literally rewire itself. A month later, the sun shone over a rebuilt Heron Point. I stood at the edge of the newly repaired road, throwing a heavy rubber toy into the marsh grass. Ranger, eyes slightly clouded but spirit unbroken, sprinted after it. His sight would never fully return, but Hale's surgeries had restored enough for him to track movement, and his other senses had sharpened into lethal precision. My left arm was fully functional. The medical board reviewed my case, classified my recovery as an unexplained medical marvel, and reinstated my active duty status. I respectfully declined. I'd fought my wars overseas, and I'd fought my last battle in the black waters of that bay. Sarah, Eli, and Mia walked up the road carrying a picnic basket. Eli ran straight to Ranger and wrapped his arms around the dog's thick neck. And that formidable Belgian Malinois, a weapon of war forged in the mountains of Afghanistan, simply wagged his tail and leaned into the boy's embrace. Sometimes miracles don't come from the heavens. Sometimes they're pulled from the darkest, deadliest waters by a loyal friend who simply refuses to let you sink. If this story of loyalty, survival, and the unbreakable bond between a man and his dog touched your heart, drop a like and leave a comment below. Don't forget to share it with your friends and subscribe to the channel for more unbelievable real-life stories every week.